Welcome to episode 53 of The Liz McMullen Show. I have an extremely special returning guest, Kate Culpepper. She's especially special because she was my first ever review show for The Liz McMullen Show, and I am so blessed to have her back on the show. So welcome back, Kate.
Oh, all my teachers used to say I was special too. Hey, Liz. Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you too, and you are special. We had a funny little thing. We were having a hard time connecting on Skype, and of course, the book that I'm reviewing is Wendigo Thrall, and when this Wendigo spirit shows up, there are electronic disturbances, as in things not working. And I was like, oh my God, I hope she's not in the midst of the Wendigo Thrall herself.
Well, if our voices suddenly go silent, people will understand why.
Or when I play back and you're just like whirring, I'm like, oh shit. You know, I think the key or an element of very well-written fiction is when it becomes real for the reader, and I am, of course, a reader. And so all of the different stories that you weave, I never have a hard time suspending disbelief, and I go so far as to feel that they're real, which, even though it was only a mild inkling that it could have been the Wendigo after you, I still was like, I hope nothing's wrong happening with her, because I tried to call you on your phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, I appreciate hearing that you find my settings real. But since so many of them are cemeteries and insane asylums and good things, it can't always be a really pleasant experience to live in my books.
Well, they're definitely unusual, but I'd want to be a part of the tribe. You know, so many of your stories, I'm like, I want in there. I like the book The Clinic, which is the first in the Chastain series, is not a shiny, comfy, warm, fuzzy story, but I'd still want to be a part of that Amazon tribe, you know, do the jailbreak, that kind of thing.
Well, that's good to hear. That's something that I have appreciated hearing from a lot of readers, is a wish that that tribe could really exist and that they could be part of it.
Yeah, I
certainly share that. That's why I started writing about them.
Is that really? Is that why you wrote, you wanted your tribe, so you wrote one?
Pretty much. I was at a time in my life when I was trying to clarify in my own head what kind of people I wanted to attract in my life, and what kind of women I wanted to be around. And a lot of the Amazons in Chastain are based on some of the women I actually met and have the privilege of being friends with, and others are ones that I'm still looking for, that I created, and I know the qualities I want in my friends because I wrote about those women.
I like this. I like it a lot, and I've adopted it in some ways. I was working on a short story recently, and I had so many different people have helped me make it happen, like between Jove Bell, who just rocks and is, you know, in her very amusing, tough love way, helped me make my story better.
Oh, I got to give a shout out to Jo Bell as well. She's given me some wonderful beta feedback, and it's just an all-around good and solid amiga.
I tell you, I'm so glad to call her friend. She's just wonderful and funny and self-deprecating, and she doesn't let all of her wonderfulness go to her head. So I dig her.
Right.
It's like, yeah, some people are truly awesome, and the ones that you know are the best part of your life are those who give without the expectation of receiving and know their worth without being, you know, cocky or full of themselves.
Sure.
So.
And it's so great to hear that you're polishing your writing too, because it's very much, I think, in terms of trusting somebody in reading your stuff, that you find that quality of friendship. You know, my original two betas that I still work with, Connie Ward and Gil McKnight, have shown me that kind of friendship and given me that kind of help and support. So it's a great avenue for discovering the Amazons in your life.
Yes. Yes, just completely wonderful. And like the cover, I'm going to be self-publishing the story, and the cover art, my webmasters and graphic designer, awesome people, Leanne, Britt, and Adrian Blagg, have done a lot to put together the cover art, and my friend Roxy, who I met through the show, and had her on and whatnot. She drew a peacock feather that is a necklace that's on the character on the cover of my short story. And I'm like, I was like, a village built this short story, and it's amazing. And the thing is, it's not a romance. It's erotica, and it's glitzy, and it's sexy, and it's fun and bold. But I'm like, but still, I think one of the most beautiful things about it are all the wonderful people that help me work on it and make it happen. And, I feel lucky. I have a little tribe of my own.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad that we share many members of the same tribe. Speaking of which, the mascot of my tribe, as I warned you, is now demanding my attention.
Okay.
So if you could read a good book or something, I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
So she has returned, Kirby, who apparently is not the boss of her. What type of dog do you have?
What kind of dog?
Yeah.
Kirby is a Westie, a West Highland Terrier. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a cutie patootie. Did he have a jailbreak? Does he disappear?
Kirby's a little girl.
Okay, sorry.
She has a tendency to try to sneak under the fence in my backyard, to varying degrees of success. So she's been on house arrest for a couple of days and still tends to get a little bit cranky, so we may be interrupted now and again to see to her little needs.
Aw, well, we are humans, so we need to do our part. So,
Exactly.
Yes. So for this particular episode, we're going to talk about Wendigo Thrall, which I was alluding to. Can you give a little summary for my listeners of Wendigo Thrall, and then we'll get back into that, and probably I'll take you on a million different tangents, but let's try to toe the line a little bit. So tell me a little bit about the book.
Well, let's see. Wendigo Thrall reunites the couple from my last book, Question of Ghosts, where I wrote about Becca and Joe, and also the characters from Riverwalker, another of my previous books, Grady and Elena. So it's the meeting of these four women, and I've transported them here to my current hood, Washington State, and Mount Rainier, which is within eye's distance of my little neighborhood. And it's the story of how the four of them investigate reports of a mysterious Wendigo sighting, a character out of Algonquin myth. Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of the evolution of how real this legend becomes during one catastrophic blizzard that happens in their mountain cabin over one weekend. Mm-hmm.
I find that, I know it's not accidental, and I know folks are also curious about this. I find that a lot of your books, all of them, have some level of folklore in them. And I was thinking, I'm like, do you do a lot of reading or research? I love the History Channel, and I love documentaries. And my minor was ancient Greek myth and religion. So I'm really into mythology. And so I'm like, what was she reading? What about her upbringing gave her this really great base of mythologies and spirit? So what's your background for that?
Well, I've always been kind of a fruit salad consumer of mythology and legend. When I was writing Riverwalker, I kind of drew on the Latina and Hispanic cultures and their folklore, and the presence of La Llorona, the ghost woman that went with Riverwalker. And with Wendigo, having lived for the past 25 years or so in the Northwest, I've had more of a hands-on experience working with Native people and learning a little bit about their cultures. And while the Wendigo is not in any way part of the Northwest culture, it's more the Algonquin cold forest north, it kind of helped reignite in me, I think, a love of Indian legend and Native people's history. So I tried to incorporate some of that into Indigo Thrall. It's a juicy character. He's really hard to resist. I mean, he's creepy.
I wouldn't say juicy. I think he's like, you know, he or she or the spirit is kind of beef jerky, considering how it's the embodiment of famine and starvation.
I love it being a beef jerky of a demon. That's great. I should have put that on the cover somewhere. But literally, you're right. That's the purpose the Wendigo served, I think, for the Algonquin people. It was the embodiment of starvation, which was a real threat to them during very cold winters where food ran low.
Mm-hmm. So I paused for a moment because the sound of the fan on Kate's computer is audible.
Come on, Alex, get back up.
So, you know, since we can't get rid of it, I'm acknowledging it. You know, I had a more interesting thing happen when I was recording. Andy Marquette was one of my guests on. I love her. Yay! Andy Marquette was one of the guests on my Halloween special. And at the tail end of her episode, white noise just started. And of course, I now think back to your book, your other book, which is A Question of Ghosts. And the white noise came, and I was like, okay, you know, sometimes, you know, Skype is funky. You turn it off and on again. You log in and out. You know, you start and stop the call, and the sound would go away, but it didn't go away. So I was just like, I'm just going to let this go. And if there's any EVPs, you know, let me know. This is very genre specific, you know. and now that I realize it kind of like, you know, dovetails us back into Indigo Thrall, in that the character from A Question of Ghosts, one of the vehicles of the ghost speaking was through white noise.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, oh, so we have a little accompaniment to our episode. It's wonderful. I so did that on purpose, but I really love our little sound effects. That was awesome.
Okay, good soundtrack.
Woohoo! So Wendigo Thrall, you know, it's not too much of a spoiler. I won't go into details very much, but one of my favorite elements was the painting over the fireplace.
Ooh, yeah.
That was fantastic, and it's not like a metaphor, because I don't even know what kind of a device it would be, but it really gave almost gravitas to some of the unusual things that were happening around the characters during the middle of this blizzard, where they're all kind of stuck in one place. And, you know, it was changing, but the changing wasn't, you know, minute. There were very large perspective changes and elements that were not in it originally, and how it evolved. And I liked it because it was something they could really visually see. And at first they tried to deny that there were changes. Mm-hmm. But it was, you know, an element of undeniability. This is something that is tangible, visible, right in front of you. It's not the mood changes that are happening. It's not the energy and the spirit that is happening after, you know, like a psychosis of some sort, like a cultural psychosis. And, you know, it made them grounded in what the reality was, whether or not they wanted to believe in it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I'm glad that works for you. I think it does too. The painting is my blatant ripoff of two sources. The portrait of Dorian Gray, mm-hmm. of course, with its changing, hideous portrait, mm-hmm. and Night Gallery, which traumatized me on numerous occasions as a child, but had one great episode that featured a changing painting that tracked the approach of a threat. So that's how I use this painting in Wendigo Thrall. Also, based on the fact that the painting actually exists that was painted by my grandmother of the mountain of Mount Rainier.
Oh.
So I just wanted to incorporate that as kind of a side nod to my family. But it does exist, and it was one of the most fun devices I worked with in that book.
Oh my goodness, that's just too wonderful. When I was when I was reading it and all these things were happening to the image, it reminded me of a short story that I had on Lizzie's Bedtime Stories. It was by Patty Henderson, and she writes gothic romances and horror.
Right.
And she almost, when I asked her to be on the show, the Bedtime Stories, she's like, I have this story, but it doesn't have a happy ending. And I said, that's fine. I want a variety of storytelling. It's not all shiny and happy. And it was a very disturbing story. And it did not end happily, but it was very, very well written. It's worth listening.
Oh, I love Patty Henderson. If she wants to do disturbing, she can be good at it, I can imagine. I'm really glad that was included in your series.
Oh, I can't have her on the show enough. And she has a very disturbing story for my Valentine's special. It's flash fiction, and it's so gruesome. And I was like, she's like, are you sure? I said, this is exactly what I want for my show, because there's going to be all sorts of stuff, and I'm always looking for variety. But yeah, she's fantastic at it. And in this particular story, Brenda Strange is like a paranormal investigator of sorts. Just because of things that happen in her life and where she ends up. And this is a short story that's not a part of the series, but with, similar characters. And she has friends who ask her to come because there's this haunting in the house, things are not quite right. And, she gets there and they're both kind of drawn thin, not sleeping very well. And, now I remember the name of the story. It's called Bag of Souls.
Bag of Souls, okay.
Yes, and it was a paper bag that they had found in a tree in front of their home, and they had brought it in for some reason, probably because it was bewitched. And basically, one character in particular was being possessed by the spirit that was in that bag, because when they opened the paper bag, it was empty. And I can't remember if it was a painting or a mirror, and this is how it connects to Indigo Thrall. But Brenda is looking into this landscape that is absolutely horrifying, and there's this shady character and that's coming and eventually does eat the soul of one of the characters that's a part of. Yeah. So it was just the landscape was so dismal and disturbing, and I was just like, oh my God. And so when I was reading your novel, Indigo Thrall, and I was looking at how the painting changed, and I love the way that each change wasn't like Dorian Gray, who remains young and the painting becomes more and more decrepit as time goes by. But there were perspective changes. There was, changes in the foreground and the lighting and the tone. And in and of itself, it would have been a really interesting project for an art student to read what you had written and then try to create it and in the different stages. And it could be a really interesting photo slideshow. I was like, if I had one of those in my pocket, I'm like, you really need to read this book, and you need to try and do what she said, because it's a story in and of itself. It would be a great installation, even if it was not related to Indigo Thrall at all. There's a lot going on there, and I liked it.
Oh, that's fun. The painting came out of a few long conversations I had with Gil McKnight, my beta, about how to culminate the crisis, how to reach the climax of it, and the end of this. And this was actually a device that got us there. So it was fun to just talk out the ideas with her and to see those changing pictures in my mind. She gave me some good feedback there.
She writes some great werewolves.
She does.
Oh, I love I don't know how to pronounce it, but the Garrule series.
Uh-huh.
Oh, fantastic.
Speaking of pronunciation, Liz, I know that Gillian McKnight is Jillian, but I've called her Gil for almost 10 years now, so Gil is who she is.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Do you know I have a friend whose name is Gillian, and I don't know why I have a mind block on it, because so many times when I would say her name, and this is like over a period of years of friendship, I just had a problem saying Gil instead of Jill. So, I was like, I'm like, I'm so sorry every time I do such a hard thing to it. I was like, I know the right way and I can't keep it. And there was a friend of mine in high school whose name was spelled Janna. But her name is pronounced Janna.
Oh, she needs an apostrophe or that little thing. Yeah.
One of the folks that I asked to pose some questions, her name is Crystal Jordan, and she didn't have a question for herself, but she had questions for authors just getting started. And your comment about Janna needing some punctuation in her name, one of the things that I'd like to tell new authors is that punctuation are signposts. They're letting you know not just how to read aloud or read to yourself. They're telling you to pause or stop. And so like a comma, it says pause, a period says stop. These are important things to consider so that, let's say somebody's reading your manuscript that you've written and they're telling you, oh, this is kind of choppy. If you have, let's say, a long sentence that has 3 or more commas in it, every comma is going to cause a slowdown. That's what it is an indicator for. So when you have too many of them, just like the ocean, it is choppy like the ocean. So, that came to mind when you made the comment about needing apostrophe and whatnot. Do you have some advice that you would give to somebody just starting out?
Well, first of all, I have known and loved Crystal Jordan for many years, and I appreciate her question. It was nice to hear her. Liz, it's always the basics of advice for a young writer I found the most valuable, and that is get your butt in the chair and write. Every day, write something. Mm-hmm. And if you're not writing, then be reading. And not just the books that you like, a variety of books, fiction, nonfiction, genre, everything that you can imagine. Get as varied a palette as you can in terms of reading the good stuff that's out there so you can recognize the good stuff. Learn to have good feedback, and good feedback does not necessarily mean praise. It doesn't mean necessarily showing your partner or your best friends your story, and while their encouragement is wonderful and very needed, you need to get some tough feedback. You need to get an editor or a beta writer who will be honest with you and give you really good, honest feedback about where your story stands. That's probably it in terms of the Lincoln Logs of writing, but my biggest advice is always to enjoy it, to have fun. That's why we write. It's not a tormented process for me. It's always been a really joyous way to express myself. Mm. And if you have that, then the basics fall into place.
I agree with you there. From getting your tushy in the chair, one of my challenges, because I'm still not there yet as a writer. Mm-hmm. My bigger challenges had been after I got edits, being able to read them and learn from them and improve my stories. And I'm the best student that you could ask for in a college class or whatever. I was always doing my assignments. I followed directions, that kind of stuff. But for writing, it's pleasurable for me, and it's something that I enjoy, and it's a form of expression. But I have a really hard time with feedback. And but I was motivated this time around for the story I was telling you about, and I couldn't believe Jove would give me so much time as she has as a beta reader. And she gives tough love, but it's snarky and it's funny and it's sarcastic and it's wonderful because it totally gets the point across to me in a way that if somebody is trying to be too diplomatic or trying to soften the blow, I wouldn't have gotten it. And I think also I have an urban sensibility. So we're used to kind of sarcasm and snarkiness and the darker side of wisdom.
Right.
that it worked for me. But even still, like I had to keep on going into the breach. Every time I received something back from her or my friend Adrienne Blagg or Aaron Saluda, I had to, put on my helmet, go in and do it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's in there too, and I'm fortunate to have such kind people in my life. But, it takes some strength of spirit to continue on even when you're feeling, somebody's looking at my baby and making commentary,
Well, you probably know I've always struggled with the editing process. Cindy Cresap, who is my long-suffering, martyred editor at BSB, has done all of my books there, and I have learned a great deal from her. But earlier, when you were talking about the importance of punctuation and the possible misuse of commas, I had both hands stuffed into my mouth, trying not to laugh at the prospect of Cindy Cresap hearing that I am masterful in any way with punctuation. The poor woman still has to exert almost Dragonian, force on me to get me to cut down on commas. But her honest feedback and the feedback of my betas has just been invaluable. I do sympathize with you. It's a tough process to go through sometimes, but you have to find voices that you trust and then listen to them.
The other thing that I think is important for new writers or, any type of writer, I suppose, is that, when you finish the manuscript, that's the first step. Getting to the end of a book is not easy. Many people never finish their novel. But in reality, the really in the trenches hard stuff is the editing after you've gotten the first draft out. And I can't tell you how many drafts I went through for a short story that's only about 11 pages. Mm-hmm. But it needed it. And each time it went through, one of my betas and came back, they had a wealth of advice and commentary and whatnot for me, and I had to keep on going back in and keep on going back in. It's not an indication of whether or not you're a good writer, whether you have the good stuff in there. There's just so much to learn. So I think for a new writer or somebody who wants to improve, you just have to, build a good tribe of people around you. And understand that it's a process, that even once your baby is nice and shiny and beautiful, as good as you can get it with, your beta readers, and you send it off to a publisher, there's still going to be some more time, rolling up your sleeves, getting it into what makes it on the shelf. And that's something that, new writers need to know about. There's just a lot involved, but you have to kind of see the end of the finish line, in the distance. But it's some tough stuff. It's not easy. You got your start with some Xena writing, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I started writing fan fiction back in the 90s sometime, and that kind of just launched my storytelling voice, I guess. Yeah, Liz, I think you were right. What you were saying about your own experience sounds right on in the experience of a new writer. Going through many different versions of your manuscript, according to the feedback of your editors and your betas, and really shaping it. I think it's a really productive thing to go through several different editions of your earliest work. I certainly did. I do that less now with my more recent manuscripts, and part of that, I think, is because Cindy Cresap has been a really good teacher, and I think I've learned a lot. But I also realized that while I would love to have every single one of my books back now to rewrite another and better version, eventually it's going to be in the best shape it can be. And trusting that process and yourself to know when you have that product in your hands, I think has to come with experience.
Absolutely. And it's a journey. And one of the things I love most about your writing is there's always a journey. There's always a healing and reconnection in the things that you write. And, there's a sense of community around the characters. And, I think that's a part of how well you do with world creation.
Well, that is nice to hear. Thanks.
Yeah, it's like I said before, I don't really have to suspend disbelief. I may have to kind of rein in my belief. Which you should never have to do with fiction, ever. But you just do it so well. No matter if it was my experience reading The Clinic, and the Tristane series in general, like, I wanted to be a part of those tribes. I could see the things happening as they did happen. I think that they are cautionary tales, many of which have been written in kind of like a sci-fi futuristic society. I don't know, what was it, the name of that book? Was it 1984? Was that the name of the book?
George Orwell's book? Yeah.
Yes. And I think that it's important, especially now, for like folks out there, like the Clinic has been out for quite some time. Mm-hmm. But I think you should pick it up and read it and think about everything that the Republicans have been doing to women's rights and civil rights and women's health in the last year. And so many of the things that they've done just seem so fucking absurd. But then you read a book like The Clinic and you're like, this is where that will lead. Because if we dismiss it as silly and absurd or a distraction, eventually, and in fits and starts, our civil rights erode. So many of our civil rights have eroded since 9/11, all in the name of fear. Mm-hmm. And, the city, quote unquote, which is a great name for the city since it's generic, probably.
Extreme, right.
Probably was in Times New Roman or something, some approved font. She, Kate's very detailed. She has, what's daily life like? Well, most art is regulated and against the law. And only a few state-approved prints and whatnot you can use to decorate your apartment and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's very relevant, and I'm frightened by how relevant it is, Kate.
Yeah, and I remember when I was creating the most recent version of The Clinic, that story, it was very much inspired by the whole Homeland Security paranoia that was generated soon after 9/11. Mm-hmm. And I was frightened by how much we're willing to sacrifice in the name of safety, quotes around the safety or security, and what we were ready to sacrifice in terms of human and civil rights just seemed to be a really frightening pattern, which has certainly played out and has been, I think, for a long time. But the backdrop of the political times or whatever was going on socially in the city was just sort of a background for me for the characters in Tristane. For me, Tristane is about Jess and Brenna, and Shan and the Amazons, and whatever setting they happen to find themselves in, I hope will make sense to the reader, because what I'm writing about is the characters and how they would, in my head, react given these circumstances. So I kind of came at it that way, through character first.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to mislead my listeners. It's not a political read. We're not reading Camus or Derrida or, this is not The Stranger. It's a very, it's very real and accessible and horrifying. In the clinic, there's a clinical trial that they're trying to see what you need to do in order to break an Amazon's spirit so that they can annex them into society and, quote unquote, provide them with all the good frills and wonderful benefits of being a part of the city. The reality is they want the timber rights. They want to take all the richness that is the land that the Amazons have, and they want to make money off of it. But in the clinic, it's all about taking Justin and seeing what it would take to break one of their warriors, so that if they can make this warrior docile, then hopefully they can make all of them docile, to assimilate them, for the greater good.
Right. I think that the real threat that Trystane had for the government of the city is its allure. The fact that there were legends and stories passing around in the city about this clan of women who were high in the hills and safe, and it was performing a kind of magic among the citizenry that was very threatening to the city, and that's one of the reasons they had to really clamp down, as well as the material rights, they hope to get around subjugating this clan.
Absolutely. Whew, some of the horrible things that they had to do, my goodness. But one of the other things that I love about your stories in general is the mythology involved, and I love the mythology of Trystane, and that there are guiding 7 sisters for different trades. And I went to Mount Holyoke, which is one of the 7 sister schools, which is no women's colleges, and so that always tweaks my little brain, like 7 sisters. And one of the cool things is that these 7 sisters embodied in a constellation are the touchstones for the Amazon community. And there's one for each trade, like Kimba for the warriors, Julia is the spiritual guide, for historians and seers, Jade for the artists, Beatrice for the gardeners, Killian, the healers, Wyman for the mothers, and Constance for the weavers and other tradeswomen. And what I found, I really liked your choice with who Brenna ends up being. And it's a war that she has in the several different books. She just doesn't want to see herself as somebody with the second sight. She'll accept, she's been a healer all her life. She was a medic in the first story, and continues on using that knowledge to, contribute to, her contribution to the tribe. But she's the least likely to see herself with vision.
Right. I kind of enjoyed Brenna's gradual acceptance of her psychic abilities. It's not something that a young woman who was raised in the oppression of the city would expect to find in the way of her own personal qualities. And I think it spooked the hell out of her. And to the Amazons, it was a gift. It was something that should be nurtured. But I think it freaked Brenna out.
A lot.
Continued to do so throughout all the series. But it was a fun part of her to write. She ended up being kind of a triple gift in Trystane, in the tribe. Her healing abilities, her psychic abilities, and she was destined to rule.
I know. And all of which, one of the things that I liked was when she got knocked on her ass.
Which time?
By Cam, who smacked her a good one. Oh yeah. She got knocked on her ass. And she knew that the reason why Cam lashed out, even though she's a child, well, not like, rockabye baby child, but, young woman, and doesn't have a lot of control over her emotions and whatnot. And so she was slapping Brenna, who was like the embodiment of, the people in the city, in the prison, and in the clinic itself, hurting them, specifically somebody that she looks so much up to, which is Justin. So for her, this is the first time that she's actually really been able to lash out. And it progresses so that eventually, Brenna goes like, look, I'm going to tell you like it is. This is what I did. I know that it was wrong. I'm not proud of it, and I can't change it. And I'll understand if, you don't want me to be a part of your tribe. But, this is where I'm coming from. And Justin actually had more vision seeing Brenna, aside from her affinity to her, seeing what there was inside of Brenna beyond, her upbringing in the city.
Right, and I think that's a theme that comes up in Trystane several times. Is they have always assimilated women from the city, but there's always a kind of a natural distrust or fear between the two groups until they really come to know each other. And part of what Brenna experiences, and later Dana in the series, is that sense of alienation, of being purely plunged into culture shock of this entirely new world and learning their own way into it, learning to be Amazons. And that's a process that doesn't come overnight, even with the best of intentions or free will. I think our places in our families or our communities, they have to be learned and earned. They aren't just given.
There's also, it's not as severe as a caste system, but in the lesbian community, there's this concept of a gold star lesbian, which is somebody who has never had any intimacy with men, and has known from like the time she sprouted whole from her mother's womb that she was into chicks and stuff like that. And so anybody who doesn't meet that standard is less of a lesbian somehow. And with the Amazons, it's like, were you born into it? Or were you, are you coming from the city and being an outsider that will never properly fit in?
Right, exactly. And the identity, I think, that I try to develop in those books is the identity of Amazon, which doesn't have anything to do with where you're born or what family you're born into. It's if it's in your spirit or it's not. And that's, I think, what Brenna comes to recognize in her own spirit after she spends time with Amazons, that she could have been born anywhere and she still would have been Tristane because that Amazon spirit was part of her.
Yeah. There's another aspect of mythology and folklore and the more modern version of seeing your culture. There's that generational challenge between the young ones who want to, break from tradition, and the older ones who are trying to maintain an established tradition. Mm-hmm. And when I was a young woman, I used to see, and so many different things from movies and books where, let's say the person is from an Italian family and their mother and father and family insist that they have to marry an Italian. Mm-hmm. But then that Romeo and Juliet, falling in love with somebody who is, from another culture. And it's awful how those parents are, trying to keep away two people who love each other. And, keeping people apart is not a good thing. But the desire to hold on really tight to one's culture and maintain it through, the drawing together of people from the same culture to propagate all the things that they feel that are good and honest and important about their history. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Harming people in the process, of course, is awful. But as I've gotten older, I've been thinking, I would miss knowing these traditions if I was so big on everything having to be modern and, forward-facing or whatever. I would miss out on so much. And my grandmother, she passed when I was 8, and she was. She went to a reservation school. She was half Cherokee. And, and my grandfather, he was Croatian. And so instead of teaching my mom and my aunt to speak, at the time it was Yugoslavian, he didn't want them to have accents. He wanted them to be able to assimilate and to be successful and to make something of themselves. Mm-hmm. And for me, I wish I knew more about my grandmother's history, which I can no longer ask her because she's passed. And I wish I spoke Croatian. I wish I knew more about my history and my roots and my past. But when I was younger, I was more about going wherever my spirit guided me and, reading what I wanted in college, taking the courses that I found pleasurable and not really thinking so much about, a future career. And I think that it's important to rejoin these histories, and you do that with your work, Kate. You like La Llorona, or in the Mexican Latina culture that you did, and then we have Wendigo Thrall, which is dealing with Native cultures. And I also like that you referred to them as Native and not Native American. Within Wendigo Thrall itself, I liked that better as a description of who they were. And I think that you are a bearer of the sacred fire. You're a storyteller, and I really appreciate you taking the time to incorporate these mythologies and folklore and oral histories and bringing it into a book, for us to experience. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad that you can appreciate the cornucopia out there of cultures and histories that we can all share, and what we can learn from the way different people have lived their lives and built their communities. And I certainly share your love of mythology and legends and just the stories that we've created. But I appreciate the fact that I have the opportunity and the privilege of reading those stories and sharing those things. I kind of think your grandfather gave you a real gift, even if you did feel a little bit deprived of not learning more about your family history and your culture and experiencing the language. His priority was to give you safety.
Exactly.
To give you security and a basis in which you could grow and flourish. And that's a gift we give to our kids, if they can ever survive to the point where they can look back when they've reached that area of awareness and sensitivity that you have in your life now, where you want to look back. Then our parents have done real well by us. They've given us the courage to learn from other cultures as well as our own.
Definitely. You've recently retired, but you did a lot of work with homeless youth and also with domestic violence survivors.
Right. I've worked for years with homeless people in different shelters, and most recently with queer homeless youth here in Seattle, right.
Mm-hmm. I bet knowing these people have enriched your stories as well, because one of the things that happens to folks who are homeless is, in the eyes of many, they're rendered either invisible or insignificant, and as such have nothing to share. But when you sit down with somebody and you listen to their stories and their experiences, and we remind each other of our humanity in that way.
Right, and it did give me a great opportunity to see outside my little bowl of reality. The people that I worked with came from so many different places, often different countries, refugees, certainly different economic brackets and different personal experiences. But this wealth of life they all brought to wherever they were in that shelter, in that moment. It was a real privilege to hear those stories and to honor those people. And I think that was a great education that I just got to witness by having the privilege of trying to support them in their efforts to become independent again.
Mm-hmm. And I bet you built some more of your tribe that way, too.
Oh, I got to admit, the women who are attracted to social service, to working with the disenfranchised among us, are women that I feel a real bond with. And I have found several Amazons in the programs that I've worked with, yes. And among the residents I've worked with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me, my interactions have been with little people, young children. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes adults forget that the little ones can be very bright and insightful and have wonderful things to share and are capable of doing many wonderful things and still we're talking 2.5, 3, older. And, they have so much to share. And I think one of the best things that you can do for the little ones is listen to the stories that they tell. For me, I'm fascinated by my niece. She's only a little over 2. And she's just kind of learning how to speak here and there. But she has the most rhapsodic conversations with herself. I mean, she is talking. We don't have a clue of what she's saying. But there's lots of talking going on. There's lots.
She may not be talking to you, is the point.
No, I mean, she may be, but I'm not getting the message. Language is about agreement and understanding. But I'm like, she's talking. She has serious talks with my puppy. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, there's just so much, beautiful stuff going on there. And I think one of the more valuable things that you can do with your time is to sit and listen and talk with somebody. And that is true for the youngins and for the adults. And, helping somebody feel human again. And I think reading can do the same thing. A good book, something, especially ones like you write that have adversity and struggle and, struggles with faith and loss of faith. But in the end, some place has been gotten to. It may not be, this shiny, happy, beautiful ending, but there's growth and there's journey and there's so much going on. And, I really appreciate that about you as a writer.
Well, that's great. I like the connection that you talk about when people are listening to each other. This is very much the kind of conversation that we often have in the Storyfire, which is a forum I mentioned to you that's opened up recently for the readers of the Tristane novels. Mm-hmm. And it's basically for anyone who's liked any of my books. We talk about a lot of different stories and a lot of different authors, and it's not really limited just to the Tristane books or my works. We talk about what's going on in the queer community and in the worlds of science and health and movies and all kinds of stuff. It really is like a Tristane Storyfire, and it's great to have my friends or Maya Dannon around just to trade those stories. It's a good example, I think, of the kind of connection you've been talking about.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We've talked about some of these things, but I have just one other question/comment from a reader, and her username is CKABQ. I don't know how I'd pronounce that. But her comment on Facebook was, "Welcome back, Grady and Elena. La Llorona. La Lloro." I think I'm missing a syllable. Anyway.
La Llorona.
La Llorona. And now, Wendigo, when did Kate become interested in these legends, and what is it like to research these stories?
Well, in Riverwalker, I really grew up with the legends. They were the ghost stories that we told every time we had a campfire in New Mexico. So I kind of grew up and was immersed in that history. Mm-hmm. The ones that have developed more in Wendigo Thrall is probably more a product of my adult life in Seattle and in the Northwest, because I was able to immerse myself in other legends. So in that way, I can say it's been a regional education for me. It's really great to connect to the histories and the stories that have evolved in each of the areas that I've lived. And it's been great fun to set my books in those areas. Those are kind of my letters home to the past homes I've had.
So when you do research, I imagine, how do you find people to talk to about different folklore and mythologies and histories? Like, when you're putting something together, when you're writing a book, what kind of resources do you reach out to, like human and otherwise? Like, for a new writer, like what are some of the things that you get into?
I Google them.
That is so profound. The Google Storyfire.
A lot of my research is done on the web, but there is an unending variety of sources about different characters who appeared in literature or in history or in legend from 100 different locations and 100 different sources. There's a really rich treasure trove of information that's just available out there, and collections of legends and mythology. So I've probably done a lot of that. Some of the ideas I've gotten have been from very plebeian and pedestrian efforts. Like, I love lists, and I love best collections lists, and going through a list of the 10 most frightening creatures ever to have drawn breath. Just for stories. It has things like Wendigos and La Llorona in them. Just as a jumping off place, those are great fun to investigate.
God, that sounds like really great writing prompts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, the other thing that I think is fantastic about the stuff that you write is humor. And I think Becca was saying it's colder than a witch's tit in here, and Elena was like, yes, my breast is kind of cold. I was like, God bless them.
Well, humor, I think, kind of naturally comes from the characters, because just in regular conversations, I hope if I've made the personalities distinct, then humor is kind of a natural byproduct of their conversation, and it just comes out. And I think Elena assuring Brenna that, yes, both of her breasts are very cold is very much part of their relationship and the natural rapport that would have developed between them.
Mm-hmm. When you were creating these characters, they already existed, the 4 that are coming from previous books. How did you identify things that you'd like to tweak with the Wendigo curse? Like, for example, Elena's not a prideful person, really. You know, she's not this, like, tall, standing, bristling, you know, I know everything and you should agree with me or do everything that I have to say. Like, she's always very warm, and, like, as a curandera, like, she just has this amazing healing quality. She won't let anybody step on her, but she's not that type of person that would be, you know, bruising for a fight. And in Wendigo Thrall, she just was getting ornery about lots of different things.
Well, your description of Elena, I think, is accurate, but she does have pride in her abilities, in her connection with the divine. She knows that that's kind of her gift to the world. Mm-hmm. And I think she's always taken rightful pride in that. It's not something you see her display every day, but here in this crisis, not only is she surrounded by educated, college-degreed women, she's in a completely alien environment, in a blizzard and a mountain cabin, and she's from the desert, so she's off balance anyway. And I think if a malevolent force were going to take hold of Elena, that's how it would get through. It would pump up a false pride and alienate her from the others. And that's kind of the inroad I think the Wendigo Thrall takes with that character.
Yeah, for Grady and Becca, I think that they're wonderful characters, and they are guides in some ways to their lovers. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think wasn't Elena a virgin as well? As Jo?
Yes, she is, right. Was until she met Grady.
Exactly, and Jo was one until she met Becca.
Virginity, an ongoing theme in my work. I hadn't realized that, but you're right. Virginity and changing pictures. I give it all.
Oh my God, old growth forests. So there's one thing, and I can't explain how it happens, but you'll know what I mean. And for those of you listening, you're just gonna have to buy a Wendigo Thrall to find out why this was really funny. But Jo is such a sterile character in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Like she has a hard time. She has some kind of, I don't know how you would put it. It's not a learning disability. It's almost like something off in her ability to understand social situations. So she tends to be very clinical, and she does whatever she can diligently to kind of understand the world around her, because it's not intuitive to her. So she got used to studying facial expressions, as an indicator, like scientifically, she's telling the truth when she said that she didn't have any tics or tells. And I was just like, okay. But the thing that really got me was when you had her say hoochie mama.
Oh, I had to let Joe go hoochie mama.
That was awesome.
She is a very austere and clinical woman for the most part, but I think under the circumstances that we're talking about, hoochie mama just came really naturally to her.
That was just fantastic.
I'm glad you liked
that. Was just that was so out of left field. I was equally surprised along with the other folks who were there to hear her say it. Hoochie mama.
Just hear things in your head and you hope they come through the right way, but I think that one probably did.
Oh my God, I never knew that hoochie mama could be so vivid. Because it said it all. It really encapsulated her entire feeling about her current state.
Yeah, I think so. And right, you can hear her say it pretty clearly.
And no, we're not talking about women of questionable virtue. She was just exclaiming, and that was genius, Kate. That was brilliant.
Oh, I'm glad you liked that. Thanks, Liz.
Oh, that was just shit right there. I was just like, oh my god. I almost fell off the table. I almost woke somebody up. I thought it was hilarious.
Oh, good.
It's just like, it's kind of like, I tell people never read a Colette Moody next to a sleeping partner or person in your home.
No.
Because Colette is fucking hilarious, and
She's
you're
funny.
like,
her and Lace Gardner.
Yes. Oh my God.
Will give you laugh out loud moments.
Oh my God, they're a hoot. They're a total hoot, and So that one I would have startled somebody awake when I read that line, hoochie mama. The other thing that I thought was really great in Wendigo Thrall was, this is a very serious situation. Even if you take it apart from the spiritual happenings that you may or may not believe in, they were in a secluded area in the woods in a snowstorm with no access to any of their quote-unquote toys. None of their electronics were working and whatnot. So that's like dire straits kind of stuff right there. And to have them go tubing in the snow, that was fantastic.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
Like full grown, like the two couples, Joe and Becca and Elena and Ren, Grady. And they were going tubing, full grown women. And they were just like, hooping and hollering and having a great time. And it was just, it was wonderful.
Well, one of my favorite, maybe the only favorite picture of me that I have was taken in my early 30s when I was inner tubing down a snowy hill over here outside Seattle, taken by my friend before I knocked her down. And I am very much as I describe Elena and Grady in that inner tube, butt up, screaming profanities and not seeing where I was going at all. So I had to recall that beloved personal memory and kind of cast it into the story. So I'm pleased that you appreciated it.
I loved it. So, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And I'm not just talking about this episode. You have I'm very visual about this. I almost can see like a needle and thread. I feel from the first scene where you're taken back to that winter moon, and then the ending. What I thought was amazing was how you planted, is Sewa the right pronunciation?
Yeah, right.
And it was so subtle what you did with Pat and Maggie, correct? And their connection, they kept on having these dreams, these nightmares that related to that first scene. And you're like, oh. But what I found was really delicate was how you showed what happened in the past with the Wendigo, where the warrior did indeed take his wife's life. and had done that. And you very delicately wove that in and out where it wasn't like this book had, you could sense between the two of them that there was romantic interest. But it wasn't a true romantic thread as in, fully flushed and whatnot. But very slowly, here and there, in moments, peppered throughout the book, you see them drawing closer. And also, the parallel to the lives, who their past lives were, as I imagine them. And when you ended it, tying it together with that one word, something so simple, Siwa, and you explained what that word meant at the end, in the last page or so, that was beautiful.
Oh, great. I'm glad you like that.
It really tied everything together, especially when, language was being used that they were not familiar with.
Right.
And the fact that they had this very synergistic relationship between them, not just what would be between two lovers, but there was something about the two of them being together in the same space that created positive energy, and then that was very literal, at the end of the book. And that was really well crafted. Oh,
thanks. I enjoyed that thread. I enjoyed developing Pat and Maggie, both their relationship now and kind of the spooky history that they'd shared. They were sort of my fresh eyes on the story. The other four characters in the book, the couples from my two previous novels, they're about a year into their marriages, and they've been together for a while. And Pat and Maggie are sort of the new romance, but at the same time, they are the oldest couple in the entire book in terms of the wisdom of their heritage and the knowledge they have of the past ways of their tribes. They become sort of the parents or the leaders of their clan for a while. And it was fun threading that through by the use of the dreams and the use of what Pat remembers about her past.
There are just so many great little things. Even, the grandmother in the, that smoke-filled room. I love watching Elena just throw out let's get real moment. Because I don't see her as the type to interrupt or to be rude or disrespectful to her elders. And she just whapped it out. And I was like, damn. I kind of like seeing Elena as a badass, because oftentimes you think of healers or folks that are very well versed in spirit and being, well actualized and spiritual. You don't kind of see the warrior or the cut the shit or what they call the come to Jesus moments. I would not predict it from her, but I really loved her backbone in this story.
Oh, good. Elena had to be pretty tough a couple of times. If you're facing down 4 6-inch wasps flying right at your head, you got to have some moxie. So there were times where I think Elena really had to draw on some inner strength, and that was fun to show that.
Yeah, and then she was a tart when she came into the jacuzzi later on, but
Oh, true.
That's neither here nor there. I could talk to you for ages, Kate. You're just too wonderful. I'm so glad to have you on as a guest.
Thanks, Liz. I really enjoyed our talk.
I never want to say goodbye, but unfortunately, we have to bring the interview to a close. But I'll just have to have you on again.
Well, I will enjoy an opportunity to talk with you again sometime soon.
Absolutely.